Support for this episode comes from the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. The Diller Awards honor up to 15 Jewish teens from across the United States with an award of $36,000 each to recognize their impact and leadership to repair the world. Nominate a teen leader today, or they can apply directly by January 8th, 2026. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 507, Jewish Music, Not Just at Synagogue. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're returning to our series of episodes exploring Jewish music, past, present, and future, talking about music for its own sake and also exploring the ways that talking about music can help us think and talk about Jewish life today more broadly. Our guest today is Basya Schechter, a singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and cantor who founded the global music ensemble Pharaoh's Daughter. Our conversation today is somewhat about music and prayer, but we'll also explore Basya Schechter's other musical creations that are not tied to synagogue. And I'm pointing this out because while we generally don't preview specific moments of our conversations before they happen, there's a moment you'll hear later on when Basya Schechter points out that many of our questions about music seem focused on synagogue and prayer, whereas her canvas is much broader than that. And we're grateful that she brought that up, and because she did, the result is a conversation that helps us continue a thread that has gone through Judaism Unbound over the years. Not only in the realm of music, we've always pushed back on the ways in which synagogue experiences are treated as a kind of default in the Jewish community, with other forms of Jewish life more on the sidelines. Today's conversation is part of that thread and hopefully pushes it forward. But before we kick things off, Lex, can you give us this week's Judaism Unbouncements?
Only one main Judaism Unbouncement this week. We've got Shabbat Unbound coming up in not too long, November 14th. That is 2 weeks from the day this episode is being released. We will have our second gathering of our 12-month-long Shabbat service called Shabbat Unbound. We'll be diving into the next prayer, Psalm 95, also known as L'chun Ranana. This is a really great chance to go deep into a particular prayer as opposed to just spending 2-3 minutes on a whole bunch like it's a playlist. So our Shabbat Unbound is a chance to really dive in. We sing the song in a couple ways. We dive into the meaning of it, schmooze about it, hear Dvar Torah. It's really, really good stuff. We hope that you'll join us. You can sign up at judaismunbound.com/Shabbat and also register for our future connections of Shabbat Unbound in December, January, every month throughout the year. So don't miss it, judaismunbound.com/Shabbat. And Dan, back to you.
Thanks, Lex. And now here's a little bit more background about Basya Schechter. Basya Schechter is widely acclaimed as a songwriter, musician, and performing artist. She's perhaps best known for her group Pharaoh's Daughter, a 7-piece world music ensemble that travels effortlessly through continents and language with a genre-bending sound. She has also been a member of the groups Darshan and Epicurus. Basya Schechter has released nearly 10 albums of music, including Songs of Wonder, her settings of Abraham Joshua Heschel's poetry to music, and also Dumiyah, which Leonard Cohen, that Leonard Cohen, called, quote, so fresh and so familiar as the work of the heart always is. Basya Schechter is also a graduate of the Cantorial School of Aleph, the Jewish Renewal Movement, and served for over a decade as Chazan and music director at Romemu NYC and Romemu Brooklyn. She's also spent many summers as cantor at Fire Island Synagogue, a flip-flop-wearing community co-led with past Judaism Unbound guest and banjo-playing rabbi and scholar Shaul Magid. Recently, Basya Schechter and Shaul Magid collaborated on a new musical exploration of Friday night prayers called Kabbalachia, a collection of prayers recorded at their synagogue and often exuberantly played and sung on the back deck on Friday nights. Basya Schechter's experiments with sacred music and Jewish music are too numerous to list, but a couple of our favorites include a partnership with Beit Torah called Karati Ta, and the Itzik Munger Project, an album of Yiddish poetry set to music. You can explore all her albums and all her work at basya.com. That's BASYA.com. So, Basya Schechter, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
And it's so great to be had.
So I thought we could start with a topic that I'm always very curious about as somebody who has maybe I do have musical talent, but somebody who has never had any investment made in them by their parents as a musician and therefore has no capacity to express any musical talent, even if I had any, which I probably don't. So with that context, I'm very curious about the experience of a musician. And I'm wondering if we could just start sort of by you're describing your, let's say, coming of age as a musician. How when you started to think about what kind of music you were going to create, how did you think about that?
In some ways, I'm an accidental musician. Like, I didn't grow up with any investment in my musical abilities at all. And it was really after I was 19 and came back from Israel that my brother was playing guitar. And I was like, dang, you play guitar really well after 1 year. How was that? And my father was a singer-songwriter in his earlier years. And he had a guitar, so I just borrowed it. And I was in college. And after 2 weeks of just kind of looking at chords, playing chords, I wrote my first song after 2 weeks. Then a flurry of songs came through, and they were all about heartbreak and unrequited love. And that's how it began. I think it was about a few years of being a singer-songwriter when I started traveling a lot around the world and being exposed to traditional melodies from Africa, from Morocco, from Turkey, from Eastern Europe, from South America. And I would learn indigenous melodies and styles. And after that, I would be like a sieve. And the kinds of music that I was listening to kind of filtered through my consciousness. And then the way I started playing guitar became very different. And suddenly English sounded really cheesy to anything I wrote, because it was much more, it tapped much more into the ethnicity of my origins, to the music that I grew up with. Because even though I was not a musician, I grew up in a Basya world, which is a Jewish girls' school culture, which we used to sit around every recess. Instead of running around, we would just sing and sing in harmony, and everybody harmonized. It didn't matter. Like, you didn't have to be a musician. Everybody just harmonized. We loved to sing. So I tapped into that, origin, the Hasidic music that I listened to at home. And now it kind of folded in all these world music influences. And the melodies I started writing were very different. One of the things when you grow up Orthodox is that you're forced to memorize so many things. You have to memorize the blessings, which are somewhat curses, of Jacob to his sons. You're forced to memorize the Pirkei Avot, which are the writings of our ancestors, like wisdom pieces, words from the Torah, words from the prophets, words from the writings. And so I had all these phrases memorized already. And somehow those words made much more sense in the context of the music I was writing. So that's the beginning. After writing so many singer-songwriter songs, that's how I began to start incorporating Jewish texts. I was starting out so late that I was just being pushed into like songs that were like coming through me and music that was coming through me. And then I started a band. Like the first show I ever did was at Barnard, and I had just started playing music and I was writing songs, and people saw me doing that. And I was asked to open up for Ani DeFranco.
Whoa, 0 to 100 real quick. Ani DeFranco, Ani Basya.
So exactly, Ani DeFranco.
Sorry, that's a Hebrew joke for those who don't. That Ani means I am, so it's like introducing yourself.
Right. So so I started out as like my first show was opening up for Ani DeFranco at the Barnard Dining Hall. It was just
very important venue.
It was a very important venue. It was like, and then I got to Postscript in Columbia and all these things like locally. It kind of pulled, like I always feel that I was propelled into this. Like I wasn't really thoughtful about it. It was really just a propulsion.
I'm actually really interested in the dining hall piece. That's, it was a joke or not a joke that it's a very important venue. I think it is an important venue. Like, I actually think, so I sang in an a cappella group in college, and we would occasionally sing in the dining halls. And when you sing in a dining hall, that's different than if you sing in one of the archways on campus outside, which is different than if you sing in one of the like performance buildings on campus, which is different than if you perform on a boat, which we did once with no mics and terrible acoustics with the wind blowing outside. That was not a great situation. But like different contexts lead to different choices musically. And I don't know how conscious you were of that, like your first time performing in the dining hall. But I'm kind of interested in going there. And part of that is I recently actually started playing music. There's a little volunteer program at the Providence Airport where people play piano in the baggage claim. And so I have really been enjoying, I go and I play and I sing, like I play piano and sing stuff while I'm playing in the baggage claim. And I've gone and looked for songs that actually relate to travel specifically, and also some that don't, but which I do the late shifts. I do it like 10:30 at night. And so people have on a weekday been traveling and like they're often like really not feeling great. It's not fun to like be in the baggage claim at 11 at night on a weekday for most of us. And so I'm looking for a certain kind of like uplifting, and that affects the choices I make, right? And so on the one hand, you could say like, oh, you're at an airport, like that just people don't care what songs you're doing, like it's your background music, which is true. But on the other, like I take that seriously. And so I'm curious from you, like you've played music, you've brought different kinds of instrumentations and different kinds of musical choices to so many different contexts. And one example is, you know, in the summers, you are regularly leading at a synagogue. Then other times of year, you are performing with a group where it's not technically like a quote unquote ritual experience, but I think a concert still is a ritual experience. Like, how do you think about the contexts that you're bringing music to? What goes into those kinds of choices?
Oh, that's a really good question. To circle back to the dining hall, I think at that time I only had 8 songs. So there was no choice to be made. It was just what I had, and that's what I sang. And I think it was good, but it wasn't my best show ever. It was.
But the order, you still had to pick the order.
The order drives me crazy. I literally bug my band. I make them go through the order with me because I cannot do it. The sequencing, that's why it's so like some of the thematic albums that I've done have sort of a natural sequence. And I love that part of it because let's say this Yiddish collection that I'm working on now of the poetry of Itzik Manger, it's all sequential because it's in the order of the biblical book of Genesis. But in terms of venue, like Friday night here on Fire Island, we actually sit outside on the deck instead of inside the shul. And it's typical that I have musical guests that come through and they support the musical team, which is, for example, this Friday night, Shaul will be in town. So we'll be doing our work Kabbalatcha.
And that's Shaul Magid, past guest on Judaism Unbound, who's the rabbi at the Fire Island Synagogue.
To go even more tangentially, we never had Friday night services when I first started this job. And the synagogue said, like, you know, the Friday night kids program isn't working out well. There's only one kid coming and that kid doesn't really listen anyways. So maybe we should do Friday night services instead. And so we're like, yeah, cool. Let's put something together. So Shaul came to my deck and he brought his banjo and he just started playing his old time music. And I was busy doing something and then I just started singing Shalom Aleichem onto his old time song. And then he sang, and then he did another one. And I just started singing Shiru L'Adonai, Shir Chadash. It's a psalm that goes into the sequence of Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday nights. And so that just happened so organically. And over the course of like 5 or 6 years, we had what you would call a nusach, a melodic tonality that our synagogue had based on this accident. And I would say most of the music that comes through in some sort of way like that. And we'll all be singing together outside and everybody has a shaker. So that's a participatory experience. And that's the nature of that venue. But when I'm playing at City Winery or Summer Stage, you know, or in venues all around the world, like that are much more regal and formal, then we'll have a different type of set. We will not give the audience shakers, for example. That will destroy the vibe immediately. We have a very robust sound system with a long sound check. The technicalities become part of the instrumentation in some ways. So those venues really determine the style and the energy and what comes through.
That, by the way, that brings us to synagogues, right? Like synagogues are a context. Like for some Jews, honestly, I don't think synagogue sanctuaries are like a context of Jewish music. They are the context. Like that's where Jewish music lives in their life.
Right.
They're going to that space because they want to experience Jewish music, and the rest of their life when they're experiencing music, it's different. But what we lose in that is like, look, there's different kinds of synagogue spaces with different kinds of architecture, with different kinds of colors, we could go into all sorts of things, but like still there is in most of those contexts sort of an air of grandeur. I actually struggle with that generally. I'm somebody who wants Judaism to just feel like, oh, I'm doing a part of my life. I'm being Jewish. I can do that on a Tuesday, on a Thursday, wearing nice clothes, but also wearing pajamas. Like, I struggle with the grandeur of most synagogue spaces. And I certainly struggle with the kinds of musical choices that people tend to make in those spaces, which for the reasons you're describing are actually good choices, right? Like when I visit a congregation and there's like a high bima, a high elevated platform, and there's a lot of distance between me and the congregants, and clearly the architectural choices were made with a certain kind of like frontal singing in mind. And so like there is a way in which the choices that best meet that space, in the same way that a concert hall is best met with certain, like, are in fact less participatory. And I tend to try to push back on it. And so I try to like de-synagogify some of these synagogues. But I'd love to hear, you're called Fire Island Synagogue, but you were just talking about leading in a context, outdoors, that feels very un-synagogish. That's fascinating to me and exciting. So like, I don't know, I'm curious, do you share some of this rebellious streak I have of trying to deformalize Jewish music to some degree?
I completely agree with you. I mean, I grew up as a cantor, which is the spiritual singer of the synagogue, through the Aleph movement, which is a renewal movement, which is completely non-frontal. It's completely collaborative and it's completely participatory. I think it's a complete failure on my part if I'm leading services and nobody's singing. The grandeur and the formality is totally not the way I think about leading services. I think about only inviting everybody to be a part of the musical tapestry.
And can you talk more about what that looks like? I mean, throughout this unit, we're exploring this. Recently, we've seen a lot of interesting moves by Jewish musicians, cantors, spiritual leaders. And some of the architectural choices I'm describing, there's been a little bit of a rebellion against the last few decades. Like, it's not just me feeling this, but you look to places like Let My People Sing, you look to Joey Weisenberg's musical modalities. Like, there's been a movement towards, like, we're going to sit in circles.
Yeah.
Now, on one level, that's just, like, kind of nice. Like, oh, we're in circles. Often in a smaller space, it's just, like, a better use of the space. Like, you're able to get more chairs there if you're in circles, as opposed to having like one side space and then rows. But also it totally shifts what is happening.
Yeah.
Like you are seeing people across the circle as you pray, which even like you could do the same exact melodies and the experiential situation would be different if you are doing them while seeing somebody looking at you and while being sort of surrounded behind and in front and across by people, as opposed to just sort of seeing the back of someone's head. That move is really important. But I guess like if you could give a window into why some of those kinds of choices are important, like when you get to a space that you have some control over how to set it up, like I'm curious how you navigate that and how it relates to the particular, musical settings that you're going with and does it differ if you're like performing one of your albums start to finish versus you're leading a service that is not one album?
I think a lot of spaces are angular, columns and rows kinds of things. And as much as I can in places where there's movable chairs instead of pews, I try to angle things more in crescent as opposed to straight lines. And I think that itself softens the space and allows for something to feel a little bit more like a wave versus an arrow being shot at you. So that's the little control that I have. And then everything that most of the choices I make are songs that are easy to catch on, easy to participate. Start maybe with a melody sometimes and allow people to get the melody and then to sing together or sing it a few times. There's just ways, or call and response is also a way. And kirtan is something that I'm very interested in now. Also, we're chanting with a harmonium or a shruti box, and it's everything you sing, the community sings or the audience sings. So I'm actually trying something, an avant-garde kirtan it's called The Stone, which is a residency by John Zorn. He has residencies. So kirtan's traditionally very, very accessible, completely accessible, call and response, and you're supposed to get into a zone. And I'm interested in that zone, but I'm interested in folding in what it would be like to have these avant-garde solos in the middle, like a break, and have avant-garde solos and weird harmonies and moments that break that zone and kind of open up the space and then allow something else to happen and then go back to the zone. So it's something that I'm going to be trying in November. I have the residency, I think it's 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Well, that makes me want to think a little bit about, I was at dinner recently with a friend who's a professional musician, a professional orchestra musician. She's actually a first violin of an orchestra. And we were just sitting around and she's telling me how she's allowed to miss a few performances because she spends a lot of time over the course of the year doing the bowing notation. And I was like, what is that? And she explained to me that, on the music, you sort of note how many notes or which notes you're supposed to play on one, how do I say this for
Stroke?
Regular people like me?
One
move, one stroke of the bow. Yeah. And I was like, wow, it never occurred to me that that was a thing that gets worked out in advance. But of course, once you realize that when you look at an orchestra, the bows are all going in the same direction at the same time, you realize, yeah, they're not all just playing it any way they want. There's got to be a whole thing worked out. So then I asked that musician, how does a professional orchestra musician like you think about playing Pop's music? Because we had just been at a Pop's concert the day before, which, was basically an orchestra playing show tunes and movie tunes and things like that. And she said, different people feel differently. I hate it. The music is good, but it's not interesting as a performer. You're not doing cool, interesting things. Like, it made me start to think about how music, there's like at least 4 different kinds of music that I think of when we think of, let's say, Jewish music. There's the kind that you were just described, like avant-garde, right? It's like, yeah, I'm going to go to this thing and it's going to be totally weird and, but interesting, right? And it's really about the musician, I think, pushing the envelope and doing something that the musician finds really interesting. Then there's a kind of music that's sort of performative. I mean, maybe what we think of as like old school Reform synagogues, high Reform, where you would have a cantor and it'd be quite beautiful, but nobody could really sing along and nobody wanted to sing along. And when you came home, you're not singing in the shower that song. It's really meant for somebody to be singing to you on a stage. Then there's a version of music that, I think about a pop singer. A friend of mine was just talking about Madonna and how there's certain songs that are just absolutely stuck in her head and she always wants to hear it. And it's like, Madonna doesn't want you singing that song while she's singing, but you totally sing that song all the time when you come home. So it's almost like a gift that's being given to you to bring into your life outside of that concert. And then the 4th kind is the kind where you kind of sing along that you were describing at the Fire Island Synagogue. And I sort of wonder how that can or should map onto the function of music in Jewish life. Because I think that a lot of people say, like, oh, music, singing is so important to spiritual experience, to that kind of uplift. And wouldn't it be important that singing be more part of our experience or day-to-day in Jewish life? How could we do that? But I think a lot of people, when they hear that, including me, are like, well, I've been to synagogue a lot, and the kind of singing that's going on there isn't really providing me a spiritual uplift. So I'm a little skeptical of that notion. But then if I were to go to the Fire Island Synagogue that you're describing, I think I would feel like, oh, I get it. So I guess I'm sort of wondering, so I guess I'm asking a kind of both a music question, like how do you think about different forms of music in that way? And then also, almost like a Jewish communal leader question that says, how can music be better connected with Jewish experience so that it plays a function for people that would actually help them in their, in what they're trying to achieve spiritually or otherwise in their life via Judaism?
Oh, what a question. That is a beautiful question. There's something that's at the tip of my, my consciousness that I'm going to share is that one of my albums called Out of the Reeds, it's like very world music, but Jewish. And it's not really a sing-along album. I think I was very guided in my early career, in my early years, I was very guided by originality. Like I had to write something that felt like it only got exciting to me if it felt like super new and different and but somehow that album ended up being used for so many people during their labor. I cannot tell you how many people say that I listened to that album all through my labor. I listened to that album.
Sorry, I heard that as like during their work at like labor as well. But like you mean like giving birth.
Giving birth. And so that's, and people say that the spirituality and the melodies were just really inspiring and soothing in that context. And Pharaoh's Daughter, the band, like the main band that I have, I cannot tell you how many people say that they went to a first date at a Pharaoh's Daughter concert and they got married. So Jewish music as like a way of creating a sensual context of our tradition, with melodies and harmonies and solos and just a very rapturous kind of experience that brought them to that place. I feel all contexts are valid. They're all different. Like I have visions of a piece I want to do that's like in a concert setting with orchestra and working with cantillation and stuff like that. So I'm like working on something like that. And so there, I don't think of it as, that's not first date material to get married, but that's more like a concert hall experience and to kind of connect with high art and tradition in the same moment. There were so many melodies I threw away in my early years that were so beautiful, but to me, they were just low hanging fruit kind of melodies. They just came through and they were easy. And I'm like, no, this is an easy melody. And I cannot tell you how many melodies I threw away because I thought that. And now I wish I can get those back because they were so good and that they would be perfect for the context of being a cantor. And, but they didn't work in the context of the kind of innovation that I was kind of striving for in what I was trying to bring to the world. Like to really connect to the most, like push the envelope with myself as much as I can to create patterns and rhythms and melodies that really just came from everywhere but come together and bring you someplace else. It transports you to something else. And it is a world of its own. I like to create worlds in my songs and in my projects.
There's something about what you're describing with the throwing out of those melodies that's just making me think about revelation and how sometimes revelation comes and somehow you're not ready for it. It's not the right time. And you describe him and thinking about the story of Moses breaking the first set of tablets. Right, that first revelation kind of didn't make it. And I don't really have a question, but it's just a reflection that what you're saying made me think about.
I like that reflection. That's a cool reflection, and that is a nice analogy.
So I have a different direction, but I hope we really like sticky note that first revelation was broken and that a lot of the melodies we need in the world might have not made it to their next stage. It's interesting. What you said about needing originality, I for sure share that in, we met through a context called renewal. It's got new in the name. Like we're originality people, right? We like newness. And this organization, Judaism Unbound, we talk about how great it is to make new forms of Judaism. And when I first started creating some of my own melodies for Jewish things, I really prided myself, and I still do actually, on creating melodies that if somebody heard them, like, some of them are Hebrew, so they know it's a Jewish language, but they'd be like, that doesn't really sound like I'm used to Jewish music sounding. And I like that. I like sort of the jarringness of getting people out of what they think Jewish music is supposed to sound like. But then I had a moment where I was part of some communities, and there were many of these all around the country, who about 10, 15 years ago were in the midst of very consciously trying to stop using melodies by Shlomo Carlebach. So there were, yes. And for those who don't know the background, Shlomo Carlebach was a very influential Jewish musician and also serial committer of sexual assault and harassment. And there were communities that in earlier periods of time had been using almost entirely his melodies for Friday night services and didn't want to do that anymore and still wanted to have powerful, meaningful experiences. And I found myself sort of sitting with my knowledge of his music and like, look, he has a style that is powerful, and there's a reason why those melodies resonated, and I have no interest in using those melodies, and certainly not using them and like opining on Shlomo Carlebach's wonderfulness as some people still actually do. But I found myself sitting at my keyboard. I didn't usually do this. I don't usually like sit down and be like, I'm going to write a melody now. But I found myself like, I'm going to write a melody for Friday night services. It ended up being Oseh Shalom that sounds kind of like a Shlomo Carlebach style, but is not by him because it's by me. And when I've shared that with communities, that's resonated better than a lot of my other melodies that I've shared. And so I hear what you're saying on that front. I think it's really interesting. And it brings me to a question that you hinted at briefly before. You mentioned in rapid succession, community and audience. That's a really interesting duality. And like, it's not that one can't be the other, and it's not that one space can't sort of be both at the same time. But I'm interested to hear more from you on that. There's, Hebrew words like kahila is often how a sacred community is translated in English. But what people don't always notice is there's also a word that comes up in the Torah a lot, kol adat b'nei Israel, like the assembly of the children of Israel. And usually when you hear that word, what follows is like Moses on his own saying a thing to the entire big group of people. Like that's more audience than participatory community. And for a long time, I was pretty thoroughly and firmly on the like participatory side. It's better to be participatory. And I do think we need an injection of that in a lot of spaces that, for the reasons Dan was talking about, come from a tradition that was less participatory. And I've gained an appreciation for the spiritual experience of being part of an audience and of being somebody who is the performer or chanter to that audience. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you how you weigh those two modalities as somebody who very regularly is in spaces where folks coming in the room think they are congregation, think they are community, think they are audience.
So that brings me to really like the balancing of art and prayer. I'm really an artist and I'm really a prayer leader. I'm doing both. When I lead prayer, there's some way I'm always thinking also about bringing artistic integrity into the prayer experience. And when I'm leading art, there's something prayerful about the art that allows it to have a lift. So in some ways, I can't see those two places of audience and community as so binary. It's ways of bringing the best of each context into the other context. There are moments, the majestic is really something powerful on a stage, and having an audience really feel it, and you feel the audience feeling it, and the energy that's in that room, you can feel it and it's an exchange just because of the way of the receiving, the receptivity of the audience, and you can feel the energy in those places. In some ways, there's an act of prayer. There's an act of like lifting something up so that everybody can experience it together. And without the audience, there is no music. Without the community, there is no prayer. And I think that those elements need to be combined. I mean, not combined necessarily specifically, but I think there's what to offer from each to the other.
Maybe shifting gears a little bit, maybe not. I've had an experience a number of times where I've been in a Jewish space of some kind. I remember the first time I felt this was at a Hillel context on college campus, but an experience where I'm in a Jewish space, but there's an event that is interfaith, or where for whatever reason, a lot of people are in the room that are not Jewish. I would note that that's true even in a Friday night service or a Saturday morning service, but like a lot of people were in this space specifically like for the first time as branded as like bringing people to this space who are not just Jewish. And consistently, there's been this awe response in a really beautiful way that helps me recognize something special about Jewish practice that I don't think we all notice. Like, often when you go to these events, like Hine Matov is sung at the beginning, or some melody that a lot of people know, even folks who are not diehards going to services all the time. There's a few melodies that a lot of Jews know, and so you use them when you want people to like immediately be on board with one another and connected. And there's been this reaction where folks are like, they're looking around like, how does everybody know these words? Like, there's no paper in front of you. There's no notes in front of you. And you all just like know what to sing. And it's not even your language. There's this awe and it's happened to me multiple times where non-Jews are just like, this is incredible. You all just like know this. When they go to church, there's like, yes, there are melodies that are familiar, but even those, it's rare that you just sort of sing them as a group without looking at them on a text. And that's powerful. That's really interesting. And I think we should notice the ways in which shared melodies, even in languages that are foreign to us, are serving that kind of role, even for Jews who don't spend a lot of time in Jewish spaces. And so I guess I'm just curious if you can talk about like what's happening there. Like why has Judaism done this? Like what's happening here that even for Jews who don't have that many anchor points in Jewish tradition, they often do have a few melodies that they, after 40 years of not hearing them, can still sing along to.
Wow. That is correct. We do have songs, I think because there are times that everybody comes together. Like there are maybe 1 or 2 days, like a Passover or high holidays. And so we have a few melodies or a few contexts that everybody sings along. I never thought of that, and I don't really have anything at the tip of my tongue or the edge of my consciousness to add to that. But I think it is a beautiful thing. And I think I have the experience as when I was a cantor for 10 years at Romamu, there were so many weeks where we had many people who were not Jewish and exactly came for the first time. And they had the same experience of witnessing that reality. And so I've seen it firsthand. And I think that is very powerful. And I think that having these songs and having these prayers and having these tunes that are so familiar and so universal at the same time to the tradition is something that really unites us and allows us to step into each other's contexts in whatever country, in whatever city, in whatever, so that there's some way that you can go in and you will hear 1 or 2 things that you know. You will hear the way the Torah, service sounds, and it'll be something that anchors you in the same. And so the innovation always comes with that caveat of we need our touch points. We need our anchors. We need the pieces that everybody sings together to kind of hold the glue of the community. And at the same time, innovation is also really important, but you're also making a statement about those other kinds of melodies and those other kinds of ways that people come together. And it's over generations and over thousands of years almost at this point that, it's a horizontal connection and it's a vertical connection through time and through space.
But it can also be kind of a difficult and alienating thing. I mean, I think that's the balance or the challenge, right? It's like, I think about when I went to college and my roommate was a Grateful Dead fan. And I happen to have not come from a background that I'd ever heard the Grateful Dead. I mean, and by the way, I've experienced this in like campfires with like, there's certain folk songs that I grew up with, like for whatever reason, my parents, sang Pete Seeger songs or whatever, but not so much Bob Dylan. And then you're sitting around the campfire and people are singing these Bob Dylan songs, which are very long and complex and have all kinds of, and they know all the lyrics. And I am there feeling like, oh, I really missed out on something. And I don't know that I can catch up. With the Grateful Dead, I actually felt like I could, because these were not so complex songs. So I feel like I've never been to a Grateful Dead concert, but if I had been at a concert, I think maybe the first one I would have felt a little bit out of place, because everybody that's there is a Deadhead and they're there because they know all the songs by heart. But by the second Grateful Dead concert that I went to, I think I would know all the songs. I mean, I do know all the songs. Like that actually is something that happened through listening to their recordings. It just sort of feels like I understand the experience of awe that those non-Jewish friends have, that like, wow, there's something that you all know. But the flip side of that is, but I could never be part of this because I don't know that. And it's in a different language. And so how could I possibly?
So I think what you're saying, I think that one part of this is you answered your own question, because I think in some ways when you're in a context that you don't understand and something inspires you and you say, wow, I want to be part of this, or I want to know this. I don't feel part of this right now. I'm going to investigate what those melodies are, and I want to learn them, and I want to come back. So that's how you became exposed to the Grateful Dead. And that was a way for you to enter into the Grateful Dead because something about that experience really inspired you. One of the things that sometimes we have, especially in renewal, are a few songs that would be accessible, like the Sanctuary song, which is, I think, a church tune that's brought into synagogues. So there are also other melodies that are, we have a few melodies that are like a few words in English that are easy to catch on to and do give access points for people who are really outsiders. And in addition, we have everything in transliteration. So even if they don't know the words, they can actually sing the words because the way of pronouncing them is actually in, and if the melody's simple enough, they could just catch on.
But I guess for me, it's sort of like, let's imagine the French Grateful Dead, same melodies, but different words. And I would go to that concert and I would be equally swept up by the melodies, but really, I'm not going to be able to sing the songs. I mean, I could make some of the sounds maybe, but I won't really know what they mean. And so I don't think that I would be as likely to kind of catch on to the French Grateful Dead as I was to the English Grateful Dead. And that makes me think also about this experience that I've told the story before in the podcast, but I have a wonderful cantor at my synagogue, and she knows that I don't really like to go to services, and she knows that I love Leonard Cohen. And so one time she said to me, like, oh, you should really come next week because we're going to be singing a lot of the Hebrew prayers to Leonard Cohen's music. And I appreciated what she was trying to do for me, but what I either said to her, what I thought was, no, that's not what I want. For me, the Leonard Cohen songs are the prayers. I don't want to sing other words to these melodies. I think these are the prayers. So in some sense, it's not what I'm looking for. And part of it is that I love the lyrics and the ideas that Leonard Cohen is putting out there. But part of it also is that it's in English and I understand it on a deeper level. And I don't want to lose that. And so for me, like, and also maybe part of this also is,
and you're a fluent Hebrew speaker, like, just for context for listeners, like, you have Hebrew, but English is like a little bit more natural for you.
Sure, but I mean, all the more so if I didn't.
That's why I'm bringing it up. Yeah.
But I think the question I have for you as a kind of a musical creator and thinker is like, how do we hit the right spot between those values? On the one hand, we want to have the traditional words and the traditional even maybe melodies and make those more accessible. And on the other hand, there's actually a lot of people in our communities who would probably be more drawn in if we actually sort of wrote new songs. And you write a lot of new songs. So I'm sort of wondering how, if that's only in the performing artist world or it's also in your kind of cantorial world.
It's in both. But you know what you're kind of reminding me? I was like, we can leave the synagogue at this point. We can just go outside. We can just leave. We can stop talking about shul. I'm very happy to stop talking. I love shul. It's so part of my life. But I mean, I was the kid when I was, growing up in these shuls. I was a kid that ran around and didn't stay in the shul ever until it was like Udatana Tokef, which is this high prayer, and Kol Nidre, which is another high prayer. So like for like these like big moments, I would stay in the shul, but then for the rest of it, I would run out. And, I'm a much better shul leader than a shul goer. So I have to be honest about that. It's just the way I'm built. I think God wanted me in the synagogue and he said, the only way I'm going to get you in the shul is you're going to lead services. So I'm happy to also leave the shul right now for a little while and take a break from shul and to transition us to something else outside of the shul.
I love it. No, so let's do that. I mean, this conversation is its own reflection of how, even in a space where we're trying to consciously upend the centrality of synagogues, we embody it. So all about it. Let's go to a different set of your musical, settings, musical creations. You've done something really interesting multiple times. So when you've done something once, it's an experiment. When you've done something twice or more, it's like, oh, this is something you do, right? I know of two. You've set Abraham Joshua Heschel's writings to music, and you've also recently set Itzik Monger, a Yiddishist who I'm not very familiar with, if I'm being honest, to music. And my question, I mean, I'm curious about like those two figures specifically, like what called to you about them. But my bigger question is like Abraham Joshua Heschel, influential, I don't know, theologian, philosopher, thinker, whatever we want to call him. He has many writings. Many of those writings are delivered orally as quotations, as speeches. You felt, I'm assuming, that there needed to be music. What was going on? And you're shaking your head at me, so I'm wrong, obviously.
You're wrong.
So tell me what is calling to you. So tell me what I'm wrong about. Tell me what's going on with your creations channeling text into music.
Okay, so this was really like one of the freelance jobs I had while I was really building my career as a musician, was being a percussionist and a harmony singer at B'nai Jeshurun, which is a synagogue on the Upper West Side that is really kind of famous for really bringing singable melodies to the congregation and musical ensembles to that, in a certain way that's very accessible. There was a woman there who was a publisher, and she was just finished publishing the book of poetry by Abraham Joshua Heschel. And she said to me these words. She said, I have this book. I thought of two different composers that would be great to potentially write music to this, but I see you first. So here, I'm giving you this book and see what you can do with this. It was a book of poetry in Yiddish. I did it. I mean, I grew up singing Yiddish, and I grew up with Yiddish in my culture and my background, but I'm not a Yiddish speaker in that way. So I had to start reading the poetry and really, really reading them every night, reading all the poems, reading the words, reading the translations. And I have this experience where sometimes there's some kind of a vibrating energy to something. And it's like all of a sudden, oh yeah, I'm ready to compose to that, and one after another. Interestingly enough, Leonard Cohen partially musically was an inspiration for that project. So it was an invitation, and I took the invitation. It took me 8 months to start composing after reading the book. I just had the book every night, and I would read, and I would get the words in my mouth, and I would understand the words, and I would feel the words. And so it came through an invitation, and I love the Yiddish. The Yiddish is so warm, and the poetry is so young and brilliant. And it's like all the later philosophy that you see in his books all the kernels of that are actually in these poems. So that was my entry into Abraham Joshua Heschel. I didn't grow up with Abraham Joshua Heschel at all. Borough Park, you don't grow up with Abraham Joshua Heschel. So my entry into this, so it was like an opportunity to learn about Abraham Joshua Heschel, to steep myself into Yiddish, and to compose something as an invitation. So that's how that happened. It was a lot of cosmetic things happen in order for something to be sparked. And I'm very an idea person. Like I get an idea. I had an idea that I didn't do, and someone else will do it maybe one day. I was like, Mashin, I'm going to use the Yiddish translation of the New Testament. I'm going to make an album of that. And I'm going to...
Oh, wow. You'd upset a lot of people, and I would absolutely listen and enjoy it, though.
I'd be like, this is like the New Testament. I'm just going to go for it. There's a Yiddish translation of the New Testament. I'm going to work with that. I have a million ideas. Not all of them get... So it was a different pathway than what you thought. And Monger was, it was a collaboration with Avi Fox Rosen, who's very much very interested in the work of Itzik Monger. And he said, this is great poetry. Do you want to look at this satirical setting of the Genesis story in the shtetl using satire and irony and humor? The Genesis stories of being mangled in the way they were, mongering them. And it was so much fun. And to sing like the different characters, he takes the biblical characters and makes the relational pieces super, super alive and raw and gritty. And, and it's just a lot of fun.
Given that I'm wrong, I am still curious though, like I'm always interested in should questions, and a lot of guests don't love should questions because, descriptive questions are easier. But like, is there a should underneath this? And what I mean by that is like, this started because somebody gave you an invitation. But like, in the way that Dan was asking about new texts, new melody, like I just sociologically, or I don't know, from an ethnomusicology lens, like once something is a song, like once a text is not only a written text, but it is a song that a community sings together, it feels official to people.
100%.
Like if I tell people there's a random verse in the Talmud and it's interesting and they should care about it, cool. if it is set to a song that is sung on a weekly or monthly or yearly basis, without even having to say in words, this matters a lot, it sort of becomes a new status. And so when you take writers like Abraham Joshua Heschel or Itzik Monger or whoever it might be, I mean, I think of like, what if we said Emma Goldman, like to pick somebody who's like deeply anti many forms of religious practice, an anarchist, like if we set Emma Goldman melodies to music and sang them as part of Jewish gatherings, I think that would sort of instantiate a kind of, oh, she's really Jewy. Like her thoughts are not just a Jew thought these things, but they are actually a prism of a lot of Jews' historical ways of seeing the world. And I do think that about Emma Goldman.
That sounds like a project that you should do because you're entrenched in Emma Goldman. So you particularly can bring that. I think there's something to be said for taking texts and lifting them out of their context to make them more accessible and more universal. Like the Care Time I'm taking the teachings of the Zohar because Zohar is so inaccessible for so many people. But to make it into a Care Time, which is the most accessible kind of singing in the world, and to bring those two things together is a way of bringing something that's so esoteric and mystical and bring the messages of those mystical teachings into a way that like those words can be actually very familiar. And the same with the teachings of Nachman of Bratslav, which is the psycho-spiritual Hasidic teachings of Nachman of Bratslav are brilliant. They're like so contemporary and like wild. And I'm doing a collaboration with Eden Perlstein, who's a rapper, and he's rapping and I'm singing the texts, the teachings from Likutei Moharan, which are the teachings of, his teachings. But there's also something to be said for the words of our own heart and for the insights that we have as writers. I think that's something that like after doing all this music, I feel like maybe a few years, I'm going to come full circle and start writing English lyrics again. And I mean, there are people like Ali Halpert and Batya Levine that write these kinds of English. They're taking like really beautiful insights about the way to be in the world. Beautiful phrases, very accessible melodies, very deep teachings. And so it's done in some sort of Jewish context, but they can actually live outside the Jewish world very easily. And and that's through the Let My People Sing movement and Hadar. But I think there's something to be said also for like the singers, the Bob Dylans and the Leonard Cohens. And Leonard Cohen, for another time, is somebody who I actually met and spent a fair amount of time with in Montreal, putting a soundtrack about people who left Orthodoxy, leaving the fold is the name of the movie. I used one of my albums as the soundtrack to that album. And then through the producer and director, and just mentioning that I wanted to meet Leonard Cohen to work on lyrics of one of my songs, it came to be.
It was always one of my dreams that we would have Leonard Cohen on the podcast. It started not long before he died. And I think in retrospect, that was never really a possibility. But knowing that you spent that time with him, and that feels exciting to me.
Yeah, I've spent time with him, but only at his grave. I haven't. I had a conversation with Leonard Cohen, but it was one way. I went there while I was in Montreal, and it was a very meaningful time. But anyway, so the Ali Halpert Batya Levine reference. If we had video of my notes that I take during episodes, I have We Rise, Batya Levine, Lucen, Ali Halpert. I actually want to go to those as a close because I think they actually get both at what Dan was saying about, like, for me, the prayers are the thing that is theoretically outside the tradition. And I don't need them necessarily implanted in Jewish liturgy to like set to a tune. And it gets to what you were saying about channeling English songs. I will say, like, when you say to me, Lex, that's a project for you, Emma Goldman, like, I, in theory, would love to do that. And as somebody who writes songs only occasionally and is not doing this like as what I do in the world, it's intimidating to take on as a project, like setting music to text that people are not already singing regularly, if that makes, like, it's easier to be like, oh, people gather and want to sing Hashki Venu or whatever, part of the Friday night service, like, and then set something like, and I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying, like, just practically a lot of people, they go to the easier task of, I'm going to take a melody people already sing and do my melody. Now, what We Rise by Batya Levine is doing is not that. What Lucen, Baby, these are two melodies that in a short time, We Rise about 10 years, Lucen, I think a little less, they have become, not to the entire Jewish universe, but they have become to certain sectors of the Jewish universe very well known.
Anthemic in some part.
Yes, exactly. We Rise especially as like an anthem of many Jewish progressive protest movements. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's happened in a short time. While it felt and feels intimidating for me, say, to create a melody and then have it soon become something that people care about, like, it actually does happen regularly. I remember 13 years ago on high holidays when I was a student in college, introducing a new melody that nobody in the room had heard of because it had just been written, called Olam Chesed Yibaneh. And it was the anthem of our, we did it each service. We came back to it. This is Menachem Creditor. 10 years later, it's one, and I mean this only with love. Like, it's one of the most overused, like, it's like the default song for certain groups of people to sing one that everybody knows. So I say this because I think it's achievable for us to create melodies that catch fire, even when they're not from texts that are already like part of the tradition. And what often happens is you get We Rise, which was not written to be, I don't think, part of a synagogue service, part of any kind of service. All of a sudden, 10 years later, it's like, we're going to use this for the beginning of the Amidah when everybody rises. We're going to use this for Aleinu because it's about themes of repairing the world, and that's what this song is about. It tends to find some way in. Is there a call here for, like, not just me, you've given me a project, but like to people out there that are looking to create forms of Jewish music that might catch on even just in their own community? What are some of the... What's a teaching, what's a something that people who might practically be looking to mobilize their own Jewish music, even in a small context, what's something they can learn from those kinds of Jewish musical creations and by your own?
We all get these insights and we all get these kinds of moments where we say, we need to rise. And so I want to write a poem or I want to write a song. And so we use those to do that kind of work. But I think we get other kinds of ideas like the Emma Goldman ideas or Nachman of Bratslav ideas, and that's more in the art world. So I think some of the music is really more on the art world, and some of it is more in the prayer world. I think I've been more guided in my life into like as less a communal singer and much more of an artist, who just kind of takes the path of their ideas. Like insight is such a beautiful gift. Like things that we get that are gifts from our own silence, from our own depth of thought, are really fodder for creativity and whatever medium. I mean, I'm speaking from a musical perspective, but I'm saying any medium, whether it's a poem, whether it's an essay, whether it's a painting, and I think that we always have the chance of elevating our experience into a creative process. And then that gives us more people access to those beautiful moments and those beautiful insights that are gifts. They're all gifts that create like a beautiful structure of art for others to experience and to be inspired again from. I'd say everybody has some way to have access to these moments, and what we do with them is really our opportunity and challenge.
Thank you so much, Basya Schechter, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really thoroughly enjoyed my time here.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. A reminder as we close that we've got Shabbat Unbound coming up. November 14th is our next gathering. We hope that you'll join us for it. This will be a time where we dive into the prayer Psalm 95, L'chun Ranana. It's our latest in a 12-month series, 12-month service, really, called Shabbat Unbound, where we connect, we sing multiple different versions of a prayer, we dive deep into its meaning, we schmooze about it, we hear Devar Torah, all sorts of good stuff. It's a great way to experience Shabbat with Unbounders all around the world. So don't miss it. Head to JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat to sign up, SHABBAT. And as we close, we really want to encourage you to be in touch with us. We love hearing your questions, your visions. If you've got ideas about Jewish music in particular, whatever you got, please be in touch. Here are the ways you can do so. There's our Facebook and Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. You can head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, check out show notes for this episode, all sorts of other goodies, and email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. We're so grateful when we hear from our listeners with whatever ways our show is influencing how you think about the world, how you do Jewish. So please be in touch. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.